Hello and welcome to Things We Said Today, our weekly podcast about anything and everything to do with the Beatles as a group, as solo artists, past, present, things to come if we can figure out what it's going to be. I'm Alan Kozin, the author of The Beatles from the Cavern to the Rooftop, and Got That Something, How the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, Changed Everything. And I'm joined by my regular co-hosts, Ken Michaels, who you know is the host of the syndicated Beatles radio show Every Little Thing. Hey, Ken.
Hi, Alan. Hi, everyone.
And Steve Marinucci, the world's only remaining full-time Beatles reporter. You can read his work in Billboard.com, Axis.com, and Goldmine, and Variety, and you name it, all over the place. And he's also the author of a book, Meet a Monkey, Davy Jones. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Alan. Hello, everyone.
Okay, so we're recording this on John Lennon's birthday, what would have been his 77th birthday, and John will be the subject of the show a bit later, but first we'll do our overview of the news. And I guess the one thing is last week, if you listened to last week's show, we were we had the news that Tom Petty had taken ill, was rushed to the hospital, was on life support, and at the time we didn't know what the situation was because it had been reported that he died and then that he hadn't died, and then later that night he did die. So we talked a bit about Tom Petty last week, but any other thoughts looking back, Ken?
Oh, there's so many thoughts, really. You know, as far as the Beatle connection, there's quite a lot of them, mainly with George and with Ringo. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have to talk about the Traveling Wilburys and what how much fun it was when those two albums came out, although we had to deal with the passing of Roy Orbison after the first album was released. But those are two really fine albums, and we've talked about that several times here on the show. And you know, it's a funny thing about the Traveling Wilburys. Sometimes the best things that happen in life are what's not planned.
Yeah.
And the Traveling Wilburys was just that. I mean, George just needed to record a B-side for a European single for This Is Love from Cloud Nine, and he needed a song. And at the time, it just so happens that, he was working with Jeff Lynne. Jeff was friends with Roy Orbison and Tom Petty and Bob Dylan. And of course, George has the long association with Bob Dylan and going all the way back to the Beatle days with Roy Orbison. And so they came up with the song Handle with Care, and the record company felt it was too good to make a B-side. So, the story goes that they decided they were going to make an album, and Bob Dylan had to go on tour fairly soon after that. So they only had a very short amount of time. I think it was something like a week to 10 days. And they came up with a batch of songs that are just great, fun rock and roll. And who could have ever predicted, first of all, to have a band with those five members? Mm-hmm. And even though, it's funny, I think sometimes you assume that when you have all this talent in one band, it's going to be great no matter what. It doesn't have to be that way. Yeah. It's kind of like an all-star baseball team with all this talent that somehow doesn't gel. It doesn't have to be that way. But the Traveling Wilburys worked because they were all, very respectful of each other. They all loved each other's work, and they all had a great sense of humor that came over in the music. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, we have two albums of the Traveling Wilburys. I'm very grateful that they continued to make a second album after Roy died. Right. But, there's so many things, to talk about with Tom, especially with George, a bit with Ringo. And I don't know if you guys want to talk about that or, have me mainly talk about it.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, you've got the song Cheer Down, which is one of my favorite of recent recordings from George. And that was actually written by George and Tom Petty. And I remember George bringing up the fact that Tom came up with the line, "If your dog should be dead, I'm going to love you instead," which is a really funny line that he put in there. Mm-hmm. And that's, kind of typical of Tom Petty and his sense of humor. Right. And you've got the tribute to John Lennon of I Call Your Name, which was part of a video that was made in 1990 that was a tribute to John Lennon in Liverpool. And both Ringo and Paul were not there in person, but they submitted videos. And Ringo made the cover of I Call Your Name, and Tom Petty was in the video playing along, as was Jeff Lynne. And also Jim Keltner was in there, and Joe Walsh as well. So, and that was a really fine cover of I Call Your Name. I enjoy hearing that and playing that on my show. Ringo appeared on Tom Petty's album Wildflowers. He played on a track called To Find a Friend. There's also the concert for George, where Tom appeared with the Heartbreakers and did a couple of George's Beatles songs, Taxman and I Need You, and as well as Handle with Care. Most of all, one thing that I remember about Tom as far as George is concerned, which not too many people talk about, is when they had a TV broadcast of the Billboard Awards, and George was the recipient of the first Billboard Century Award. And Tom Petty did the introduction for that, and it was a great introduction. And he gave the award to George on camera, on TV, and that was a pretty high moment. Also, the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert, the very end of which everybody performed My Back Pages, and George sang a verse, and Tom Petty sang a verse. It's kind of funny. You'd think that Bob Dylan would be last doing the verses because it's a tribute to him, but George was last. Eric Clapton was on stage, Neil Young, Roger McGuinn, and Tom Petty and George, and that was an incredible moment right there. So many wonderful things that Tom Petty took part in as far as George is concerned, and Ringo. Also, the video for I Won't Back Down, which had both George and Ringo in it. That's a pretty mean feat to have two Beatles in your own video. And even though Ringo didn't play drums on the song, in the video you see him playing drums to the song, as well as he's kind of circling this globe. He's looking right at it. It's kind of funny.
That was a very Wilbury song because Jeff Lynne's in there too, on the video. So you could probably kind of throw that into the Wilburys barrel there because it sounds a lot like the album, So
sure, but there was a lot of activity there between Tom and George and Ringo. So apart from the fact that he's been a mainstay in our lives for the last 40 plus years on rock radio. I mean, there's hardly a day that goes by, because most of the time when I listen to the radio, I listen in my car. And I do a lot of channel surfing, but hardly a day goes by when I don't hear Tom's music. And that says something, and he just put out an incredible catalog, so many great songs. And that's it. I don't know what more to say, but that's quite a lot right there as far as the Beatle end of things.
Yeah, I think that one of the things about Tom Petty that's kind of interesting is he's actually significantly younger than the Beatles.
Right, that's a good point because, I mean, the Wilburys were basically all these older guys, and they pulled in Petty. Yeah. And that's an extreme. That says a lot right there about him,
Well, he was another one of these people, I think, who, took up his guitar after seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show. There's sort of a lot of people like that, and I think it's sort of a direct inspirational link in a way. But he also adhered, like Dave Grohl as well, to the sort of classic 60s rock kind of sound and feel, the idea of real instruments being played at one time in a room, that was basically his aesthetic, and in a style that was not radically different from the Beatles, Byrds kind of sound of the 60s. I mean, you hear a Tom Petty track, it's Tom Petty. It's clearly him. I mean, apart from that, you recognize his voice. There are certain stylistic things that are his and not picked up from 60s things, but nevertheless, there's that general sound and general approach that's of that time and of his own time. You know, he was both. He had a foot in both worlds.
Right. That was well put. And he always talked about his influences and mentioning the Beatles and the Stones and the Byrds, and he wore it on his sleeve.
Sure.
And apart from that, I also think about a guy that had integrity, because he fought his record company when they wanted to raise the list price on his album.
Yeah.
Just because it was very popular. He also fought Ticketmaster, I believe it was, at the time when service charges became added to the price of your concert tickets. So he wanted to handle the tickets all by himself. And I admire a guy like that,
One thing that was really noticeable this week was how much his death affected everybody. I mean, it wasn't just, normally when celebrities pass on, there isn't the reverberation like there was with Petty. And you could see, especially in the initial comments, especially because it was such a shock, the way it all happened. But even as the week went on, a lot of people were really mourning his passing. I mean, really hard. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that I was surprised his age was, what was it, 66?
66.
I mean, I didn't think he was that old. He didn't look that old. And also too, the fact that he had just a week before had played the Hollywood Bowl. I mean, that was the end of the tour, and he had other dates scheduled. In November, he was going back out on the road.
Yeah.
So, I think that's the thing that really got to a lot of people, that he had a very youthful look, and a lot of people, especially, people, who'd been around in the 70s and 80s and who liked his music. I mean, this wasn't it. We're not talking about somebody from the 60s now. We're talking from the 70s and 80s, which means a younger generation of fans. I mean, this is probably the first big rocker from that era, from the 70s or 80s. I shouldn't say first, but I mean, probably one of the biggest rockers from the 70s or 80s that has passed on like that. And the fact
I don't know about that. I mean, the last couple of years we've had to deal with David Bowie.
Right.
And I think that a lot of people were affected by Bowie's death.
No, I'm sorry. You're very right there. You're right about Bowie.
And that went on for a while after his death.
It actually still is. I was wrong there. You're right. But Petty just seemed to have this very youthful look, and maybe it had something to do with the fact that he was the young guy in the Wilburys that, against all these older guys. But I think that really hit people pretty hard. So,
and you also had Prince, and I think that affected a lot of people too.
True. Okay.
As well as George Michael.
And actually, Prince and did you mention Prince and Tom Petty playing "While My Guitar Gently Weeps" at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? Yeah. See, there's a moment that, in fact, I think I posted that online right after, as we were in the first few hours after the news came out that he was ill. I mean, that alone. And seeing Prince's guitar solo and the whole thing, I mean, that still is probably one of the, for all the criticism that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame gets, and we won't even talk about the nominees this week, never mind, I mean, that was one really good moment, so anyway.
But, there's one other thing that I just want to bring up, which has really bothered me for the last couple of years, apart from the fact that we've lost so many great and talented people, and the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, if you're under 80 years old, you're still young. That's just the way that I look at it.
Thank you.
But it's the coverage that the death gets. I mean, there's hardly anything that's ever done on television now. It's all on the internet, and that really bothers me. I mean, you might get something on the crawler about Tom Petty dying.
Yeah.
And, obviously because of what happened in Las Vegas, that has to take precedence over everything else. But Tom Petty mattered.
Right.
David Bowie mattered. These people, Prince, all the ones that we mentioned. And it gets very little coverage on TV. You got to rely on the internet now. You got to go on Facebook to read articles, and that really gets to me because it almost makes it seem like these people don't matter as much.
There was a great tribute today that our friend Harold Lepidus passed on to me just a little while ago, a cartoon done by Andy Marlette of the Pensacola News Journal, and it's worth looking up if you haven't seen it. If you look up Marlette is Marlette, and it shows Tom Petty arriving at the pearly gates, and Roy Orbison and George Harrison are there to meet him, and Petty says, "I can't believe I beat Dylan here."
Oh dear.
That is just a wonderful tribute. But anyway, okay.
One more thing, because I know that Paul and Ringo issued statements, but I listened to an interview that Danny Harrison gave, and he referred to Tom Petty as a dad to him, because after George died, he was an only child, and he relied on certain people that he was very close to, and Tom and Jeff Lynne are like dads to him.
Oh, yeah.
So you can just imagine how he's feeling,
Yeah.
So.
Oh, yeah, that must have been. It must have been very hard for Danny too. So, anyway,
sure.
Okay.
We have some other news, right, Steve?
We have some other news. Yeah, I'll run through this relatively quickly. Ringo announced this past week that he's donating he's making a donation and dedicating his first concert at the in Las Vegas to the victims of the Las Vegas shooting that's at the Planet Hollywood in Las Vegas on the 13th. So that was cool, and I actually haven't seen any other entertainers doing that kind of a thing, so that's good.
You see a lot of entertainers raising money for Puerto Rico as well. I mean, there's just so much going on to raise money for now that it's people have whatever their particular personal priorities are.
Right. There was the thing on Saturday Night Live with Jason Aldean, who, by the way, who spoke about who was the guy on the stage at Vegas when it happened, and he spoke about it. And then what does he perform? I won't back down.
Right.
Yeah. It's a very classy move.
Right. Yeah. Right. And I can. I mean, it must have taken a lot of must have been a lot of emotion for him doing that, on such short notice like that. And that was a very cool idea that Saturday Night Live did. For those of you that had not planned to pick up the Pirates of the Caribbean DVD, here's a reason you might want to consider it. You know that Paul McCartney is in the movie briefly singing Maggie May. You can barely recognize him. I mean, in fact, when I saw the movie originally, I was like, that's Paul McCartney, and sure enough it is. But the special features on the DVD have an interview with Paul talking and joking with Johnny Depp, and how Depp asked him to be in the movie, and how it was kind of trading favors because Depp has been in Paul's music videos, right? Yeah, and they both kind of joke about that. But the real reason to get the DVD. Not only do they show the version in the movie of Paul singing Maggie May, they show the whole clip of Paul in there, and how Johnny comes on him in the dungeon, and he says, "Uncle Jack." Paul plays Johnny Depp's Captain Jack's Uncle Jack, who he was named for. But at one point, one of the directors says, "We made Paul do a quiet on the set take. And so all you see is Paul singing Maggie May with nothing happening on the set. So it's not the version, besides the version in the movie that's in the movie and in the special feature, there's an additional version, an outtake, so to speak, of Paul singing it with no noise, no background noise. Ooh. So there's a reason to pick up the movie. The movie itself is okay. I mean, I will say that we saw a preview of it when we were in Disneyland in 3D that was absolutely wonderful. It's the beginning part where where they have the bank vault, And that was just one that is hilarious, and there are a couple of nice moments like that in the movie, but definitely that's a reason to pick up the DVD. So,
but he's playing guitar, right? To Maggie May?
Is he?
Well, if it's a cappella, then he's not playing anything, right?
Yeah, I don't think he's playing anything in the movie at all. I think he's just singing. So,
okay.
But like I said, the first time when Johnny Depp comes into the scene, there's all sorts of noise around him. The second time when they do the quiet on the set, it's just Paul singing.
Right.
So
you can add your own guitar part.
You can, yes, you can. Yes, you can. The new Jeff Beck Live at the Hollywood Bowl video and CD that came out this past week has a live version of Jeff Beck doing A Day in the Life, which is not the reason to really get the disc. I mean, the concert is a very good show, and he goes back through his whole catalog. He plays all sorts of things. He does a several Yardbirds tracks, some with Jimmy Hall, who sings great, and some with Steven Tyler, who sings great. And then Jan Hammer is in there, who he played with on an album or two. I can't remember if it's at least an album. Unfortunately, as I said in my review that I wrote on Access, I wished Rod Stewart or somebody else had come in there, because there were a couple of songs that really would have been nice to hear. But there's a lot of good songs in there, so it's a good retro through Jeff Beck's career, and he still plays like he hasn't lost a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I remarked is how good he looks. I think he looks better than Jagger. Actually, he's a little young. He's less than a year younger than Jagger, but he looks like about 5 years younger than Jagger does. So,
right.
Speaking of Jagger,
but one more thing.
Go ahead.
You know that the studio version that Jeff Beck recorded of A Day in the Life goes back to an album that George Martin made called In My Life. Mm-hmm. And he appeared on that, and George produced it.
Okay. Thank you. I'd forgotten about that. That album was so weird. I mean, it had so many unusual things about it. But
Robin Williams,
yeah. Oh my God, yeah. That was something else. And then, since we're mentioning Mick Jagger, the Rolling Stones announced this past week, or it came out this past week, that the Rolling Stones are putting out a BBC album. It's not going to be nearly as. It's only going to be one disc, and I'm really surprised that they're not going a little crazier. They are putting out a book with it called On Air, but I'm glad to see that that's finally out. Although bootleggers have had this stuff for years, and actually they've had more. And in fact, I was saying that there were some BBC tracks that were auctioned, I believe it was last year or the year before, including one that the Rolling Stones never recorded, and those aren't on the album, unfortunately. So, but anywho.
Wonder where they got that title, On Air.
Gee, I wonder. Yeah, I mean...
Yeah, they're slowing down. They're slowing down. It used to be, I think John once said, if the Rolling Stones are so innovative, how come everything the Beatles do, the Stones do 6 months later? Now it's like 4 or 5 years later.
Right.
Obviously, they need to,
I do. And by the way, I Want to Be Your Man is on that CD. So.
Okay. And there's a Gary Clark cover.
Yes.
In a new film, right, Ken? Good.
Yeah, he discovered Come Together,
mm-hmm.
which is in the new Justice League film, which I heard is going to open in mid-November.
Okay.
But you can actually hear that version online. You can go on YouTube from Gary Clark Jr., who's a great guitar player.
And one of these days we'll have to do another cover show and catch up with some of the new ones and old ones we neglected last time. So, any other news?
There's one thing that I forgot to mention about Tom Petty, and that is that when Ringo released his album Vertical Man, he did a cover version of Drift Away, the Dobie Gray classic, which is kind of appropriate for Ringo to sing because the line goes, "Give me the Beat Boys." But originally, Steven Tyler was on the recording there to sing a verse. But at the time, the record company pulled it. Columbia Records didn't want two records out at the same time. Aerosmith had the single "I Don't Want to Miss a Thing," and they didn't want there to be any confusion with having two records out with Steven Tyler on it. So they pulled Steven Tyler's vocal, and they replaced it with Tom Petty, who phoned in his vocal and sang a verse on there. And the version with Steven Tyler went out as a promo, but the one that was on the actual album had Tom Petty on it.
Mm-hmm. There we go. Okay.
So, as well as Alanis Morissette, who also sings a verse. So it's kind of several vocals, multi-vocals, lead vocals on that song.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Alrighty.
Okay, so we should move on to the main order of business for the night, which is celebrating John's birthday. And what we decided to do was each choose 5 songs that we particularly like of John's from his solo career, but that were not released as singles. So we've tied one hand behind our backs, and there's plenty of good stuff to choose from. And who should we start with? Let's start with Steve.
Oh, okay. Well, this was actually tougher than I thought it would be, and I have to admit, I had the resource that I used here was this isn't Steve Turner's, Paul Denoyer's John Lennon, The Stories Behind Every Song, which is a great little book if you're looking for information on Lennon's solo career. But here's what I picked. I love Plastic Ono Band.
Mm-hmm.
I love both Lennon and Yoko's Plastic Ono Band. So I picked 2 songs from that. I picked Love,
Mm-hmm.
and because I mean that's such a great, and it's actually such a non-Lennon type song. I mean you're expecting. You don't expect it you don't expect him to do tender songs like that, and it's just so untypical of him. And then God, which I think is so emotional, and I love the way. And I really had trouble. I mean, I kind of wanted to put almost every song on that album because I love that album so much. Working Class. I had Working Class Hero on my list for a while, and I mean that was such a pioneering song with all the swearing in it. But Love and God were the 2 I picked out of that album. And then I picked How Do You Sleep probably for obvious reasons. I think the reasons were obvious there because of the way they went back and forth at each other at the time. I love that. I just love that song though. It's just a great song. The next one I picked is New York City from an album that everybody seems to hate. I'm not sure.
Not me.
Really?
No.
Really? Okay.
Not at all.
Well, good for you, because a lot of people do. Everybody seems to take that one down, and there are some good moments on that, and that's one of them. And then the last one, I went a little deeper than normal, and I picked I Know, I Know.
Nice.
And I really like that. So anyway,
What is it about that song? I'm just curious.
it's such a joyful song, as is New York City for that matter, but in a different way. It's just real bouncy and joyful, and I liked it. So there.
Okay, you said about Love that it's surprising that he sang not that we don't expect him to sing such a tender song, but I mean, there's Julia and there's various things over the years,
Right.
Yeah, I mean, in the same way, I mean, people always usually the discussion is about Paul, and everybody says he's singing these gentle love songs, and people bring up Helter Skelter. But John had that other side too. They both did. They both had both the sort of screaming rocker side and the tender ballad side, I think. But Love is a good one. There's an alternate mix when it came out as a single, I think just in the UK. I'm not sure this was released in the US, but when it came out as a single after he died, it had a sort of hard opening instead of the fade in.
Yeah.
So that's a little collectible variation for you.
I also was going to do, well, all right, we were going to save the runner-ups to last, but "Oh My Love" was the one that I, and I'm not doing it now. "Oh My Love" was on my list for quite a while, and that one, ended up not being on there. What was surprising, though, as we're, when we talked about this last week, I really didn't think. I was thinking, well, it's going to be kind of difficult because there isn't. Because so many John Lennon songs were released as singles.
Yeah.
They weren't. And I was really amazed when I went through the list. I'm going, that's all the singles that they've released from him. It's like, wow.
There were a lot of posthumous ones, and I wasn't sure if we were counting those or not, and I wasn't sure if we were counting B-sides or not. But yeah,
I tried to avoid all of those, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, the solo Beatles, there's so many albums they released that either had no singles or one single. And that's really, it's quite sad in a way because so many songs deserve to be singles that weren't. I mean, just take a look at the Imagine album.
Yeah.
It only had Imagine.
Right.
That's it. The Mind Games album only had Mind Games. So many songs are worthy of being singles and being hits and big hits, I feel. So it's very much like that.
Yeah. With Double Fantasy, because it came out right before he was killed, they released several.
There were 3.
Yeah, invalidating some of my choices. I would have loved to have Watching the Wheels, but
yeah,
right, yeah, that was one that came to my mind too, and Woman was another one. I mean, but both of them were out as singles, so you couldn't.
I would have put Woman in there. I would have put Mind Games in there. I would have put Instant Karma in there.
Well, those are obvious. Those are obvious singles. You can't.
I know that. That's what I'm saying. If we included singles,
yeah,
that would be in there. So.
Yep.
I think it was better not to do the singles because they're so obvious. But
this is much more fun.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think in your list, the outlier really was I Know. And is there anything else to say about that to convince people who are shrugging and saying, "Huh, I know, I don't even know that one."
I know that's the point. It's one of those kind of undiscovered masterpieces. It's really such a beautiful song.
Yeah.
And the fact that I agree. The others are pretty familiar, and I tried not to. I didn't want to go too deep. Because those other 4 songs are just great songs, and they, But I Know is just such a wonderful song, and the thing is that probably a lot of people, are going, yeah, what, But it is really a nice song.
Yeah.
So
just out of curiosity, Steve, did you look on Facebook today because? No. For John's birthday, I posted that song.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
I did not notice you had posted that today.
Yeah.
No, I basically, like I said, used the Paul Denoyer book for because he has all the songs listed. And I was looking for, to get just names of songs, and that's what attracted me. And that, and I was going through and. And I just it just whatever hit me, and I know hit me at one point, and that's why I picked it. And then I played it, and I went, oh yeah, definitely. So
okay, so Ken.
Well, I like what you said, Alan, about stereotyping with John and Paul, because I've always said that John Lennon wrote some of the greatest love songs himself. It wasn't just the rocker, and Paul McCartney didn't just write love songs. He wrote a lot of great rockers too. So it's kind of ironic. The reason why I'm bringing that up is that of my 5 songs that I chose, 4 of them really are love songs, or the softer side of John. The song that I picked at number 5 was Grow Old With Me. I just think that's a gorgeous song, a wonderful sentiment in there. The words flow perfectly, like great poetry. It's got a great melody to it. And in some ways, It's hard for me to pick which version I like more, the one that was just the demo, the one that was on Milk and Honey, or the one that had the George Martin and really Giles Martin, because Giles told me that he was working on that too, their orchestration on it. I like both treatments. In some ways, it's kind of haunting when it's just John and the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And then I like the whole orchestration as well. It's just a gorgeous song. I know John said that he wanted it to be a wedding song, and it was chosen by my wife and I. We had 4 wedding songs, and we had one from each of the Beatles, and that's the one we chose from John.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a gorgeous song. Along with me, the best is yet to be, and just love everything about that song. The song that I picked at number 4 is one that has really grown over the years for me, and one that I just appreciate so much more now than I ever did, and that's How
Mm-hmm.
from the Imagine album. Very simple lyrics in there, but very powerful. You know, they're words that we can all relate to at various points in our lives when we're confused, you know, about where we are and our state of mind. You know, how can I go forward when I don't know which way I'm facing?
Mm-hmm.
To open a song with those words, I mean, how powerful is that? How many times have we all felt that
Yep.
in life? You know, there's so many things expressed in that song, and it's a gorgeous melody, and I love the orchestration around it. I love the way that John delivers it vocally, that feeling of kind of like helplessness
Mm-hmm.
in his voice. I just think it's one of those undiscovered gems from John. Number 3 is the only one that I would consider to be a rocker, and that is I Don't Want to Face It,
Okay.
which I just happen to love from Milk and Honey. I love everything about it. The words are fantastic. You know, there's a sense of humor in John's lyrics. You want to save humanity, but it's people that you just can't stand. Or something like you've got one eye on oblivion. What is it? You've got your eye on oblivion with one eye on the Hall of Fame. You know, the irony, the duality of that.
Mm-hmm.
I love that, and I love the bass line in the song as well, which is an important part of that song. Very catchy. You know, it's just one that whenever I think about the songs from Milk and Honey, it just jumps out at me. I love the 6 songs that John did on Milk and Honey, but for some reason that one just sticks with me more through the years. And yes, I love Nobody Told Me, but you know, we're not doing singles here.
Right.
My number 2 song happened to be I Know, I Know.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just love the whole melody in there. I love his lyrics. I love the way the whole thing was arranged. It is a very Beatle-y kind of song in a way, melodically, in terms of the harmonies. And there's a bass player who was on that album, Gordon Edwards, who did a fantastic bass line in that song. It's almost kind of what Paul might play, I think, in that song. And, you know, every now and then in the solo careers of the Beatles, you'll find certain songs that you think might have worked with a Beatles arrangement. And that's one of them. For me, I know. I don't just love it for that reason. I love, everything about it. And it's just one I think people should explore more. I've said many times that I think Mind Games is the most underrated of all of John Lennon's albums. And it's also my favorite of John's albums, also probably because it doesn't get the exposure, you know, and it always sounds fresh to me. You know, I love every single song on that album. And the number 1 song would have to be Out the Blue. I think Out the Blue is just a great love song. It's an outstanding love song that, you know, every fan of John should know if you're going to pick songs that were not hits. And, a great love song to Yoko and wonderful melody, great arrangement. You know, he was so skillful at doing that. And there are certain songs on the Mind Games album that, you know, I See Sen is a favorite of mine. One Day at a Time is a favorite of mine. Of course, the title track. I love Intuition. You know, all of side 2 is just phenomenal. Meat City is one of my favorite rockers of his. But as far as ballads go, Out the Blue is an outstanding one. You know, it's one of his best songs, you know, in his entire career, as I believe these songs are the ones that I picked. But those are the ones that, you know, it's tough for me because I like every song that John did in his solo career except one. It used to be 2, but now it's down to 1. So
are you going to tell us? Are you going to tell us which one it is?
Well, when I was on a previous Beatles podcast, I mentioned one Beatles song that was not my favorite, and then I got a lot of heat for it because I'm never that critical. I'm hardly ever that critical. But if you really want to know, I'm not crazy about Angela.
Okay.
It kind of meanders a bit as a song. It's not gripping in any way. I love the fact that John and Yoko wrote a song for Angela Davis. I'm not all that crazy about it. I used to not like I Don't Want to Be a Soldier, and now I like it a lot
Mm-hmm.
because it's very free-form John.
Right.
It's not a very structured song. It's kind of jazzy. And, I wish that there was more of that
Mm-hmm.
in John's solo career. But, yeah, I mean, all the songs there on it, there's only one that I don't care for. He's had such a solid catalog overall. Those would be the 5 that I would pick.
Okay. Steve, any reactions to Ken's choices?
No, I mean, he went a couple places that I didn't, but no, I thought his were good choices. Interesting that we both picked I Know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
By the way, my list was not I noticed, Ken, you did a number 5 to number 1 list. I didn't. Mine weren't in any order. Mine were just 5 songs. So
Yeah.
Okay. That's fine.
I just wanted to make that point. Anyway, but no, I liked your list. So
okay,
there we go.
Mine is like Steve's in that sense. I didn't do it in any particular order either, except maybe more or less chronological. But then I sort of move them around in the playlist here, so it's not even totally chronological anymore. I did not pick I Know. So, and yet I do have a couple of overlaps, one with Ken, one with Steve. And so going chronologically, the first one, which overlaps with Steve, is God. I love that song. It's probably my favorite song from Plastic Ono Band. It is a great, except for, My Mummy's Dead, it is a great ending to Plastic Ono Band. Because keep in mind, we're getting this album as the first, if you're not counting Two Virgins and the famous Life with the Lions, it's the first thing we're hearing from him. And also, I guess, not counting Live Peace in Toronto after the Beatles broke up, and so we want to know what he has to say, and he's and he's just come out of the Janoff thing, and there's a big Rolling Stone interview, and so
who just passed away, by the way.
That's right. Yes,
Janoff
that's
just
right.
Passed away. I'm surprised you didn't pick anything from Life with the Lions, Alan. I'm surprised.
Well, I
wait. He's got another 4 to pick.
Yeah, well,
you don't know. It might be in there.
That's true. Okay.
It could be, or I could put it in now that I see you're open to it. No, I'm going a more conventional route this time.
Okay.
So the thing about God, it's there's a lot going on that album, and then we want to hear, what he has to say about the Beatles. And in God, he basically tells us that among all the other things he doesn't believe. And it's also, it's one of those songs that we've heard outtakes of, and he tried it so many different ways. I mean, there are acoustic guitar versions of it. But he chose to release the one on the piano with the piano as the central instrument, and I think that was a really good decision. I do kind of like the energy of some of the guitar ones. I mean, he sings it a lot more angry in some of the outtake versions. And here it's more reflective. But, even the opening line, God is a concept by which we measure our pain. I mean, that's a really interesting thing to think about. I think it may offend some people with conventional notions of, God and whatever, but I kind of think that, he may have a point there, concept by which we measure our pain. There's really a lot to think about in that one line. But mostly I think, we think about the list at the end of people he doesn't believe in, and ending with Beatles, and then he believes in him and Yoko. And so in a way, you get both sides of John in that one song. You get the angry John, and you get the love song ballad, John, just in that last line at the end, you know. So that was,
There's so much intensity in that song.
yeah,
It's kind of like, the a day in the life of Plastic Ono Band,
that's right, that's right, that's right. I mean, I love the whole album. I could have chosen anything from that, but God to me is just really a standout. And let's see. So on to Imagine. I chose "Give Me Some Truth" because again, that to me, I mean, "How Do You Sleep" was a contender, obviously, but I kind of, in a way, didn't want to get into the whole John versus Paul thing in this particular list. But that was a great song too. But "Give Me Some Truth." I mean, we're talking about he's going through Nixon trying to have him deported, or J. Edgar Hoover trying to have him deported. But Nixon is in there too, and he gets into the lyrics almost every time the verse comes around. Son of Tricky Dick. So it's a song that, apart from the Tricky Dick reference, kind of dates it a little, but you take that one thing out, and that song is good for any old time. It's good for now.
hmm
And, it's angry, and it's clever, and it's well written, and it's also a really great rocking track. It's played well. It's got a great feel to it, and really kind of gets the adrenaline going.
And also George Harrison gives a really stinging guitar solo.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And the next one, along similar lines. I mean, I guess this is why I arranged the list to put these three together. The next one is "Steel and Glass."
Mm.
Another one of his angry songs. And, in this case, he's supposedly, or pretty much overtly, talking about Alan Klein, but he later went back and said, and it could apply to a lot of his songs, that he's also writing about him, himself. He did, I think, more self-analysis than a lot of people do, and he is often, he'll often write a song that's very critical of someone else or some other situation, and then a couple of years later he would give an interview where he'd say, yeah, it's true, it was about that, but it's about me too. And he said that about Steel and Glass.
Mm.
But I think maybe he also was trying to just sort of soft pedal the sting on the Alan Klein thing too, because there's some really nasty stuff in that song.
Mm-hmm.
You leave your smell like an alley cat. I mean, he didn't mince words. That
Mm.
was the thing about John. I mean, one characteristic thing about John. It probably was that, and in all of my first three songs, that's that side of John too. The next one is my overlap with Ken. I chose "Out of the Blue" as well for pretty much the same reasons Ken said. It's a beautiful love song. It's the other side of John, and it's also it's a really attractive melody, and it's nice production, and it just sort of shows that side of him in a very, I think, nicely developed way. I mean, there are love songs and ballads all through his output, so there's always one to choose, but that one I just thought was exceptional,
hmm
so I chose that. And then for the last one, I actually was tussling between two of them, but since one of you mentioned one of the two, which was "Grow Old with Me," I'll go with the other, which is "I'm Losing You."
You can agree with us,
Well, I do, but I mean, simply for the sake of giving the listeners more variety. um,
Okay.
so I went with "I'm Losing You," which I also really like. Maybe even like it better than "Grow Old with Me" anyway. But it just it's a great track. In fact, both of the released versions, the one with Cheap Trick and the one that came out on Double Fantasy, are great versions. I think I prefer the Double Fantasy one, but I really like them both. And it was, he's in autobiographical mode again, which he was a lot of the time, and probably in all 5 of my songs actually, where the story is he's in the Bahamas with Sean, and Yoko's selling cows, making deals, whatever, and he's basically writing a song saying, we're not connecting, in a way, and it's interesting, and it's also just a good sounding track, even if you don't even bother with the lyrics. It's just a great track. The lyrics are great, but so those were my 5.
Good list overall from all 3 of us.
Yeah, we should. You like compilations so much, we should put all our songs together.
Really? Really? None of us picked Working Class Hero, right?
Right.
Which is really a surprise. In fact, Alan, I expected you to pick that. I don't know. I almost did. I kind of mulled over that and decided not to, but I'm surprised one of us didn't pick that.
Well, here's the thing. We decided on 5. And so, even though he didn't live long enough to make as many albums as, say, Paul or even Ringo, I knew that I couldn't pick really more than one song from an album,
right.
if I wanted to try and, represent his entire career, which I wanted to do. So I thought, I love Working Class Hero. I love everything on Plastic Ono Band, really. But for me, God was the one, so that sort of meant I couldn't do Working Class Hero too.
Right.
But in a way, if let's just say your 5 favorite songs all happen to be from the same album,
yeah,
you should be proud of that. You should be proud to say that. You don't have to pick one from each album.
Well, yeah, I wanted a spread though, because I liked his entire solo career, with the possible exception of Sometime in New York City, and which I didn't choose one from. So yeah, I wanted, I like the whole spread of it, and so I wanted to get the expanse of everything. So yeah, I mean, if could have chose just one album, and but I felt it would have been limiting.
So we have a few honorable mentions from each of us, don't we?
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I already mentioned that "Oh My Love" was hanging in the balance. There was almost. I almost made my list, but I decided not to. But that was probably my my runner-up. "Oh My Love," so which I adore. I adore that song, and it was very tough to keep that out. It was very tough to keep that out.
So do I. I love that song.
Yeah. Well, my runner-up was "Grow Old with Me," but you can look at, Remember on Plastic Ono Band, or even I Found Out, very raw, very direct, very John, in terms of, stuff that they wouldn't play on the radio, I Found Out is just as rough as Working Class Hero in a way. Some of you sit there with
sure. No. Yes.
And well. There are so many that by making it so that we couldn't choose singles, that actually did tie a hand behind our back, because there were so many, great ones that would have loved to include, but they did release some of the really best stuff as singles.
So. Even "Woman is the Negro of the World" is a song that I'd love now.
Yeah.
Whereas I didn't care for it when I was a teenager, when it came out.
Yeah.
Now I love it to death. But I have a handful of honorable mentions, which I can mention very quickly.
Sure.
I love "Scared" a lot.
Okay.
I love the whole sound of it, the production of it, the lyrics, of course, John's vocals and how it builds in the song. Some great lyrics in that song. Very, very personal. I love that line, "You don't have to worry in heaven or hell. Just dance to the music. You do it so well." I love that. It's the sound of that record. It is haunting.
Yeah.
And start off with the wolves howling.
Yeah.
I always play that song Halloween time on my show. Meat City, I love a lot. It's a great rocker, I think.
Yep.
It's so catchy. Just got to get me some rock and roll. New York City, I do love. It's so Chuck Berry-esque, that song, I think. Cleanup Time is in there. I love how funky that song is, and the sound of the horns and how well it works in that song. I did put God in there as well. Just have to admire John so much for saying what he did in that song and being so brutally honest. And Oh My Love is in there too. It's just such a gentle ballad with a great melody. Has kind of an oriental feel to it. And just love that one. So those are just some of the honorable mentions from me.
Okay.
I was interested, Ken, when you were talking about saying you liked Sometime in New York City. I just remember when that album came out, how everyone really was down on it, and it never really got all that much. I shouldn't say attention. I mean, it was never really considered one of John's good albums.
Yeah.
No, it's the one that everybody blasts.
Right.
And a lot of people, because of the political nature of it and who he's writing about, look at it as being dated. But I can still appreciate songs about people from the past if I still like them as songs, if I like the melodies and the lyrics and the arrangements. I mean, John Sinclair is a song that I love a lot. And I love John's guitar work on the song. I think that's a very big part of that song. New York City, I mentioned. I happen to like Attica State a lot as a song. And I do like some of Yoko's songs on that album, too. Not all of them, but quite a lot of them. Sisters Oh Sisters, I think, is one of my favorite songs of hers. And like I said, Woman is the Nigger of the World is a song that I really appreciate now. And it's not just what John's expressing in that song. It's the whole arrangement of it. It is very Phil Spector-esque to me, although Phil was supposed to have worked on that song. Going by what Gary Van Sciak told me, I think he only worked on that song, maybe not much more than that. But it does have all those strings in the arrangements, which I think make the song somewhat haunting. The sax playing in the song is such a big part of that song. And I love the way that song ends, too. I like songs that at the end, it's like there's no resolve. And with Woman is the Nigger of the World, when John kept singing, We Make Her Paint Her Face and Dance over and over again, you don't expect the song to end that way.
Right.
It's just so different. I love it for that reason. Much the same way, Too Many People has a weird ending to it, just that jam at the end. You don't expect it to go in that direction. Or for that matter, Maybe I'm Amazed is like that. But I like songs that have weird endings like that. So, and there's a lot of edge in the songs on Sometime in New York City. It was a good, for the most part, raw album,
Yeah. I think that was sort of the point of it. He was saying it was sort of like journalism in a way, and it has the newspapery kind of cover, and the idea was to go in and react quickly, like a troubadour to the news and the political situation. And it doesn't strike. I mean, yeah, I guess now that you mention it's dated, I guess in a certain way it is. I probably like it more now than I did when it came out. But to me, it just seemed like because it was done so quickly and on the fly and, trying to get it, into the shops while the issues were still hot, it seems really sort of half-baked to me. I mean, I don't like Attica State much as a song. I mean, I understand, the issue, obviously. I mean, I was, there at the time and, and it was in the news and it was good that he said something about it. I just didn't think it was much of a song and liked the live stuff on it. And the other thing is that about the stuff they did with Zappa on it, Zappa released in a different mix, so you can get two mixes of that stuff. I think that probably, what did he called, what is it, A Small Eternity with Yoko Ono? I mean, I think they wouldn't have called their version that, but, it's interesting having two mixes. And and there is such as we talked about last week or the week before, such a small amount of live John stuff that it's great to have that second disc.
Right.
But yeah,
I love the live version of Well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just good. It's great, edgy. Rock and roll right there.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not affected by songs where the subject matter is a person from the past, or when there are political names mentioned from the past. You take a song like Young Americans from David Bowie, where he mentions President Nixon. That song sounds just as contemporary to me now as it did back then. Mm-hmm. I'm not really affected by that. Right. So it has more to do with the overall feel of the song, the melody, the whole arrangement. And of course, John's voice is a big part of it all too for me. So John's one of my favorite singers, period. So he carries a song so well just because of the voice alone.
Yeah,
so
it's just amazing to me that he didn't like his voice and was always trying to find ways of doing something with it on record, either double tracking or putting a lot of reverb or whatever. He had an incredible voice.
Yep.
So
some of the most talented people are the most insecure. So
yeah. Okay, so I think we've pretty much run out of time, and thank you both for coming up with your lists. I had fun doing mine as well, and I think we'll just say how to get in touch with us. If you want to write to us as a group, you can contact us at thingswesaidtodayradioshow@gmail.com. We have a Twitter presence, which is @thingswesaidfab. And we have a Facebook page, Things We Said Today Beatles Radio Fans. So you can post on any of those. People also post on the YouTube versions of the show that we post. You can hear us on YouTube, on Podbean, and all kinds of other places. And
we're on the TuneIn Radio app.
Okay. And you can reach me at either Alan Kozin or Alan Kozin Remixed on Facebook. And Steve, how can people reach you?
You can reach me at BeatlesExaminer@gmail.com, and I have my own personal Facebook page that I post music and other things, and so you can catch me there. And then a Beatles News and Information page that I post just Beatles stuff, and a lot of it. So you're welcome to join me there. Ken?
My email address is everylittlething@att.net. My website is kenmichaelsradio.com. Beatles trivia every single week. You can win prizes, one of 9 great prizes every week. There's special contests as well. I should be starting a new one this week on the Brian Wilson compilation called Playback, and that's all solo music of Brian's. And again, that's at kenmichaelsradio.com. I also have a Facebook page too, so you can friend me on there at Ken Michaels.
Okay.
All right.
So, thank you both, and thank you all for listening. And for Ken Michaels and Steve Marinucci, this is Alan Kozin saying thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.